we really want to see the time that you have at the moment as an opportunity, and we want to turn something that could be potentially perceived as negative into an opportunity for you to do some extra learning. Hence, we're putting out these webinars as a free opportunity for you to pick up some new skills that you might be able to use, firstly, in your own lives, but secondly, for the clients that you work with. The Better Health Generation is really committed to making sure that we're supporting you in the role that you do and the community, as well as the clients that you work with. So thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. So as I mentioned, the topic for today is on tips for coping with coronavirus anxiety. I'm going to talk through what is anxiety, and I'm also going to talk through a model that we call the Thrive model. It's a model that you can apply to your personal circumstances, and it's also a model that we could potentially in the future look to adapt and use with job seekers or the clients that we work with. For tonight's presentation, I'm particularly focused on you, and I want to make sure that your resilience is right. I want to make sure that you're coping okay, because in order to help our clients, you need to be the best you can be today. So tonight's focus is just on you. I've also got a couple of slides at the end for those of us who are parents to alert you to some strategies for talking to your children about coronavirus, and I just thought they might be helpful if anyone on the line is trying to work from home with their children and vice versa. So I think it's pretty obvious to all of us on the line that it's very normal to be experiencing feelings of worry, anxiety, stress, and some of us are experiencing grief over the potential loss of the lifestyles that we have at the moment and what that might look like in the next 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, even up to 6 months. Those feelings are completely normal, and what I'm here to talk about today is how we might be able to moderate some of those feelings so that we can perform better in our personal lives and work lives. So the overall stress response that we would be having at the moment as a normal reaction to what's going on in the world can be seen to be broken up into 4 different sections. The first one, we will notice in our body some frequent headaches, potentially fatigue, breathlessness. They're the kind of physiological reactions that we have to stress. I'm sure you're not surprised to note that some of those stress reactions are also quite similar to the symptomology that we're hearing about with coronavirus. And this is where it becomes really confusing. Within our minds, we also have a reaction where we become a little bit more muddled. We also have an inability to concentrate. I'm hearing from some of my staff that they're having trouble sleeping. There's a negativity as well that sometimes overwhelms us when we're in a heightened state of stress or anxiety. Our behaviours, we become prone to doing some fairly unhelpful behaviours at the height of stress. We have an overeating or excessive behaviour reaction. We have see people obviously drinking more alcohol, sleeplessness, and for those of you who smoke, there's also an increased smoking reaction. In relation to our emotions, when we're overly stressed and anxious about a situation, there is definitely an irritability, an anger, an anxiousness, and an apprehension that we all feel. So while many of us have a stress reaction to the current circumstances that are occurring in the world at the moment, many of us experience stress in different ways, and so some of us may have 1 or 2 of these different symptoms. Others of us might experience more of those symptoms. But needless to say, those reactions at the moment are quite normal. Just noticing as I'm talking, there's a couple of people on the chat. It looks like no new questions, so I'll move on to the next slide. This is my, by far my favourite slide in this presentation, and it talks about how much stress is good stress and how much stress is not good stress. All emotions are on a spectrum. In this particular slide, you will see, if I can annotate here, that low stress, make sure that's coming across. It's not coming up on mine. The low stress to high stress is just talking about the level of stress that somebody might be feeling on the bottom axis there. And the left axis shows you low performance to high performance. If we imagine those two axes as starting at 0 and finishing at 100, we would kind of notice that stress at about 25% is good stress. It means that we can perform to a moderately high level of performance. When we get stress up around 95%, we start to notice that our performance drops off. This is particularly important around these current times. Many of us are still working from home. If our stress levels are getting over the 75 zone, then we know our performance at work will drop off. Sometimes we might call it the moron zone when you're working over 75% stress, because actually your performance and your capability around performance is reduced at that time. So any strategies that you can use to keep yourself in the stress and anxiety performance zone is the most helpful. And we recommend as clinicians that anything between 25% stress and 75% stress is good stress. When you start getting over 75 towards the 100, then that stress is not so helpful for you, and it's going to impact on you. That's either going to have an impact on your work performance or your performance personally in life. So it's good to be aware of the level of stress or anxiety that you are personally bringing to a range of situations. So how do I manage this anxiety that's happening at the moment? I've already said to you that some anxiety is normal, that you will definitely feel a reaction in your mind and your body, and your behaviours will change as a result of what's going on in the current circumstances. But what do I do about that? How do I help myself to make sure I contain the anxiety and the stress so it's in the optimum zone? I don't want to be overly anxious about this situation and behave in ways that might impact on my future or might impact on my work performance. I'm recommending that you consider looking at the Thrive model, and I'll go through the Thrive model at each of the different stages. And then at the end of the discussion around the Thrive model, I've got some questions for you that I'd like you to pose to yourself. So Thrive stands for, is an acronym that stands for the five top strategies for managing your anxiety during the coronavirus time. First one is time management. Second one is helpful thinking and making sure that we're thinking through risk. Being reasonable about the situation is the R. Increasing your connectedness and making sure we remain connected to people. Considering your values and also looking at things that you can still enjoy in the context of potentially being self-isolated. So time management, we've all heard it before. I've edited it a little bit for those of us who are working from home. Firstly, it's about creating a priority list. Many of you probably already do this. You start the day with a to-do list and create the priorities and check them off. Some other helpful strategies in relation to time management are around doing the most agonizing task first when you get into the office, so that you can tick that off your list. It's very easy to procrastinate, and when you've got a task that's likely to be most difficult or most agonizing, it's important to do that first up in the day. When you're working from home, I think it's particularly important to remember to contain your work day, to make sure that you have a set start time and a set finishing time. Working from home doesn't mean that you need to continue working throughout the day. It does also mean that you need to take breaks during the day. And these breaks should probably be aligned with your normal business hours. The more that we can maintain the work-like routine, the more likely you are to be able to manage the anxiety and stress related to the current situation. Setting up a good workspace at home is also really important, and the more that you can separate that from your leisurely states at home, the better. And what I mean by that is it's more helpful for you if you've got a desk in a particular area of your house that's not likely to be in front of the TV, that's not likely to be in the zone where you're relaxing. What you want to do psychologically is make sure that when you sit at this desk, it's uncluttered with other activities and you're just focused on your work. And the other point about time management at the moment is to make sure that we limit our exposure to the media in relation to the coronavirus. I'm sure that's not news to you, that when you turn on any device at the moment, that there is an update on every single platform about what's happening with the coronavirus. I don't think that listening to that all day is particularly helpful, but if we can contain that time, and if we can certainly have intervals of time in the morning and an interval of time in the evening where you can understand what's happening in the world around the coronavirus, that would be more helpful than having the whole day listening to what's going on. So let's move on to helpful thinking. How we currently understand risk is that as a psychological strategy, I guess, there are two main factors when we're considering our risk of coronavirus. We start to think about the environmental factors that might be impacting on us. We also start to think about the psychological and cognitive factors that might be leading to us developing a perception of our risk of contracting coronavirus. Now, the risks in the community are, what is the probability that I'm likely to be contaminated? How do I perceive that? Am I a high chance of getting this? Am I a low chance? And what about the likely impacts if I do get that? Are they going to be quite serious or catastrophic? Those kind of questions that you might have in your mind around the current situation will certainly lead to you making a judgment about the level of risk that you have at the moment in the community. In relation to your psychological state at the moment, we have also what is our perceived ability to control this risk? Can we control what's happening today or not? What about our concerns for family members and other loved ones close to us? How does that play into our perception of risk at the moment? And have we ever been through something like this before? I know when I speak to my parents, they seem to be a bit more blasé about it than me. And I think that's because they've been through harder circumstances than me. But have they been through this? You know, current reports are saying this is a 1 in 100 a year event. have they been through this? So our previous experiences definitely play into our perception of risk. And also the grief, as I've mentioned before, you know, what we're likely to lose as a result of this pandemic plays into our perception of risk. So when we evaluate all of those things together and we think about the current situation, we tend to, in our minds, evaluate whether or not we're at risk or not at risk. And as long as the anxiety that we have is equal to the level of risk, that's normal anxiety. Where we have anxiety that's problematic is when the likely chance of us getting the condition is quite low, but the anxiety is not equal to it, so it's higher. And that's where anxiety becomes slightly problematic. So our perception of risk and the way that we think about the current situation plays a big impact on trying to adjust those two constructs together. So let me make that clearer. I guess I'm asking you, have you thought about these particular factors before? And if you have, how helpful are they for you at the moment? Does it help you to say that there is a high chance that this will happen to you when statistically we know that there's a 0.3% mortality rate at the moment? Is it helpful? So here's where we're trying to evaluate psychologically the chance of this happening to us versus our emotional reaction. Our emotional reaction should be equal to the chance of something happening to us at all times. So that's a bit of a complex slide, so apologies. And it looks like I've getting people to ask me questions now. I might come back to them. So helpful thinking, when we're thinking about helpful thinking, we often look at the specific ABC, sometimes we call it DE model. And this is the way that emotions are developed within all of us. When we think about the A, that's normally the action or the situation or the event that's occurring at the moment, the particular thought that we have about that event. And I've given two examples here. What if I get sick? I can't cope with all of these changes. It's those particular thoughts that lead to the different types of feelings or consequent feelings that you might be having at the moment, including the anxiety that we discussed before, the stress and the sadness associated with where we're at. Unfortunately, those emotions, as we know and as we looked at before, they lead to some unhelpful behaviours. It's not uncommon for a negative feeling to lead to an unhelpful behaviour, such as overeating, which is probably my downfall, chocolate, or potentially avoiding situations. So the A, B, C, D, E model, I'd like you to have a bit of a think about right now, today, this morning, the situation that you're in, the particular thoughts that are going on in your mind. And you can let everybody know that as a psychologist, it's quite okay to hear thoughts and hear those voices in your mind. That's completely normal. What is that voice saying to you, and how is that leading to the feelings that you've got today? Just going to pause for one moment and get you to think about that A, B, C model and how it applies to you. I guess the next question that I've got for you is, how could you be feeling if you used helpful thinking and you tried to change that thought, the previous one that you saw, which was, I can't cope with all of these changes. If we turned that around and said, I'll cope day by day, what would that then do to our feelings? It would likely change our feelings. So I'd pop in here, I can cope one day at a time, would likely lead me to be feeling more optimistic and more hopeful. And you can see how helpful thinking when you analyse exactly what's going on with your perception of risk and any of those negative thoughts that might be related to that, how you might be able to change those to try to balance out the emotions a little bit. The third strategy, though, is reasonable. What is reasonable at the moment? What are the reliable and reasonable sources that I can be getting good information from? I've listed a couple here. It's well known and it's reliable and reasonable that if we practice good hygiene and good sanitizing practices, that we will protect ourselves. So when I talk about reasonableness, I talk about going to good, reliable sources like the World Health Information Organization, like your government resources that are available to give you good information about what's going on at the moment in the world. The media is and has been prone to, I'm sure you're not surprised, hyping things up. So going to these sources is a really helpful way to make sure you're making reasonable approaches to what's going on in the world at the moment. And as part of being reasonable, it's also thinking about what we can control at the moment and worrying about the things we can control, not the things that we can't control. Increasing connectedness. So being self-isolated or being at home doesn't mean we don't need to be connected. All of us are on the line right now because we want to be connected, because we want to learn something new, which is fantastic. But being connected in this time is also about making sure we understand who the 5 people might be that we're going to reliably connect with in the course of the next 4 weeks. And what about our parents? Asking our parents who are the 5 people that they're going to connect with in the next 4 weeks, and making sure that they've got the methods available to connect with them, making sure they understand how to use FaceTime if they want to use FaceTime, but making sure we keep ourselves protected when we're connecting with others, but also making sure our parents and close elderly relatives are protected as well. Last one, the second last one is values. Understanding and taking stock of your values is a great time to do it. While we've got the time and while we stop for one moment, we can take stock of what we really value. If it is that we really value family, what is that? Are we living our lives to those particular values? And how does that value play out during this time of crisis? What do we do with that value? There are certainly a number of different activities that you can do to understand what it is that you value. And the closer that you live your life to these values, the often more fulfilled and happy you are. The last one is enjoyment, and making sure we take some time to have some enjoyable activities each day. These activities might be things that you haven't done in a long, long time, like playing a card game or playing a board game, dancing, karaokeing, all of those things that make you laugh and make you smile. This is your opportunity to take 30 minutes each day and have some enjoyable time. Physical activity is also just as important at this time. Physical activity, eating healthy, all of those strategies lead you to making sure that you are more resilient during this time. Obviously, rest is also an important part of that. So to summarize what I've just been chatting to you about, the Thrive model will give you the best Teflon or best resilience for the current circumstances that we're all going through. The anxiety that is related to coronavirus needs to be tempered with good psychological strategies that you can use to make sure that your anxiety is at the same level as the risk that you're likely to contract the virus. These are really important points to remember. I've given you some really quick tips around time management, around helpful thinking, around reasonableness, around making sure we continue to increase our connectedness, because being socially connected helps everybody's mental health. I've also given you some tips around understanding and finding your values and taking the opportunity to find your values. And lastly, to make sure that you have fun. Now, if there's any of these areas within your life that you don't feel that you're a 10 out of 10 in, then I'm encouraging you to make a plan, and make that plan so that you can achieve a 10. What would it take? If I'm only a 5 out of 10 in time management, what will it take for me to increase that to a 10 in the next 4 weeks? Let's use the opportunities that we have at the moment when we are at home to be able to build our resilience through the Thrive model. I've got some handouts that I'd like to share with you through the IEP that will help you to develop your own resilience and Thrive plan. So we'll send those out via Helen after this event. Just to finish up, this is the plan that I just mentioned. But just to finish up, for those of us who do have children, I just want to run through a couple of tips. Firstly, don't be afraid to discuss the virus with your children. It's really important that we normalise what's happening, because children do catch on to what's going on with you. We need to address any of their misconceptions. I heard from my daughter that anyone not at school 2 weeks ago had the coronavirus. So the kids are talking about it, whether they're joking about it or what's happening. We need to address the misconceptions, because anxiety in children is the same as anxiety in adults. It needs to be at the level of risk that is actually occurring in the community for them. And what we know at the moment is that although the incidence rates for children are increasing, the level of risk at the moment for children is quite a lot lower than adults and older adults on top of that. It's also important to address coronavirus with children, because they may be worried about their grandparents and they may be worried about elderly relatives, depending on what they've heard in the media. Obviously, like any parent, we also need to listen to their worries and hear them out. So let's just practice those really good parenting skills that we have with our children. Lastly, my final point about our kids is to make sure that we limit their media exposure to the incidence rates that are increasing and heavily and presented every second in the media. Incidence rates are rising. This is not something that's going to be that helpful for children. We need to be able to limit that information if we can, as much as possible. And the point I make on this slide is that you are the role model for children. So if you are sitting there on your phones and you are constantly on social media looking at these things, that is definitely role modeling something to your children that may not be consistent with your values. So that's kind of me. That's our quick 30-minute tips. Again, I wanted to let you know it was all about you guys and giving you some strategies and supporting you to achieve your full potential in this really difficult time. The next couple of presentations are focused a little bit more on clients and how we might be able to work better with clients. But again, I want to make sure that you've walked away today with some strategy that you might be able to use to help mitigate and provide yourself with some resilience to the difficult time that we're all going through at the moment. I might turn over to Helen and see if there's any questions.
Hi, yeah, we've had a couple of questions come in. A few people have asked if the slides are going to be available afterwards. Now, I know that we're going to make the recording available, and you've mentioned there's some handouts, so they will cover, I'm assuming those will cover everything that you've gone through for us today. Brilliant, excellent. We also had a question around the 25% to 75% stress levels, and the question was how is this measured? How would we go about measuring that?
That's a wonderful question. I think it's about your own personal levels of stress. So if I was to ask you today to rate how stressed you are out of 100, would you rate yourself at 50? Would you rate yourself at 25? Or would you rate yourself at 90? Sometimes those stress levels are about how you experience it. And taking stock of that each day is a really helpful way to see how your stress levels change over the day and where you're likely to be in the performance zone or not in the performance zone. It really is a personal perception of the level of emotions that you're having. I will say this though, after monitoring my own stress levels over several years, I can pretty much pinpoint when I get over 75 now, and it's often I'll notice things like losing my keys, losing something. If I've lost something, it's normally related to the fact that I'm over a certain zone, and that's just my trigger. So understanding yourself first will then tell you what your triggers are to getting over the 75 zone.
Excellent. So it's a bit of self-awareness and taking some time at the moment to spend that time reflecting on where we are and what maybe has brought us to that point during the day.
Exactly.
Excellent, thank you. So we've also had a question around advice. We talked about distractions and setting up a workplace or a workspace away from those distractions. What advice can you give for people if they can't, because of the size of the home they lived in, a one-bedroom flat, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? The only strategies we have in that space is to use your headphones or your earphones, or to create optimum times that you can work. So if it's able to be negotiated that you might be able to work staggered hours. Distractions obviously take you out of the performance zone, but keep in mind that the peak level of concentration that we mostly always have is about 25 minutes. So if you can find times of the day where you can get 25 minutes of quiet time, or you can use headphones, that's the optimum level at the moment, I think.
Okay, I think that's definitely how I've experienced it. We had one here, there's only two more, so we won't take up tons of your time. How can we help our clients and community cope with this situation? We've had feedback that a client has sort of reported feeling quite trapped, that they can't go outside, they can't meet family and friends, and that's making them very worried and anxious. So what's the best response when speaking to someone else in that situation, would you say?
I think the response, Helen, is definitely multifaceted. If you think about the Thrive model that we've just spoken about, I would be really talking to a client about, let's talk me through the helpful thoughts that you've got at the moment. What's working for you, what's not working for you. And also trying, as we've done in the Thrive model, to look at other ways to increase social connectedness that may not be just going outside, and looking at all of the strategies really as part of the T, the H, the R, the I, the V, the E, because it's not just one simple answer. It does seem like to me that the discussion we had around risk versus the chance of something happening versus the anxiety levels, they seem a little bit out of order with that particular client on first perception. So asking the client to just talk me through why you feel that you're at significant risk here, talk me through your anxiety a little bit more, and trying to get a little bit better understanding of the thoughts that might be fueling that would be the first approach. And the second approach is using the whole gamut of options in the Thrive model.
Excellent. And that really keys into the sort of final question that we'd had, and that was around risk perception. Someone had mentioned, and I can really empathise with this, the concerns for other family members being the trigger that is heightening that risk perception, and raising the level of anxiety. And the question was sort of like, what can we do? But I think you've just answered that. It's going through, isn't it? That those steps and thinking about what is triggering this, why am I worrying in this way, and sort to explore it
Yes.
more. And actually the chances, statistically the chances, and if we're following the advice and doing the things that we need to be doing right now, those chances, those risks will have dropped even more, won't they?
I think so. And I think there's a phenomenon going on at the moment where we're all so worried about our risk that we've forgotten that as health professionals, or as employability professionals, that we've got a responsibility to making sure our clients are safe, and talking to them about ways that they could safely engage in the community is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And once we get over that extreme feeling of anxiety, we've got the chance to talk about those things with our clients and be more proactive about certainly managing the current situation and taking more of a leadership approach to it.
Excellent, thank you. Those are all the questions that we have in at the moment. What I will do at the end of the session is make sure if I did miss any that came through that we make a note of them. But that was brilliant, thank you.
Well, thanks everybody. Thanks for taking the time out. We will be running another session next week, and obviously we'll be publishing those slides and the coping and resilience plans for you guys to have a look at. And yeah, looking forward to next week.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you
Thanks.
everyone who attended.
Thank you. Bye.